This is NC Spin, an unrehearsed discussion on issues of interest to North Carolinians. Now, here is your moderator, Tom Campbell.
Welcome. You've heard and read the spin the media and the politicians have put on the issues of the day. To get the correct spin on what's going on in North Carolina, let's introduce you to our panel of experts. They include former Representative Connie Wilson, Chris Fitzsimon from NC Policy Watch, syndicated columnist and author John Hood, and former Secretary of State, former Attorney General Rufus Edmisten. Well, the number one topic of discussion is the election, and we want our panel to give you their spin on the candidates, the issues in the polls. We also want to talk about the redistricting maps drawn by an independent panel of judges. And as always, we're going to ask our panel to tell us something we don't know. Let's get to it. Labor Day has come and gone, and November's elections are now less than 2 months away. We're seeing increased numbers of political ads, a lot of polling data, and candidate appearances throughout our state. It's an accepted fact that North Carolina will play a pivotal role in the outcome of the presidency and the U.S. Senate. We want our panelists to give us their spin on the campaigns and the issues. Connie Wilson, without question, the premier race is the presidency, and one poll shows Trump up by 1 point, another has Clinton up by 4. North Carolina, in our state, a large number of voters say they don't like either candidate. Is this why they're having such a tough time favoring one or the other? Or have we become a state that's truly purple, meaning that we're not favoring Democrats or Republicans?
Actually, the answer is both. I think a large percentage, I don't think it's a small, but a very large percentage are disillusioned with both. They believe there should be other options that are out there. And then we do have a changing North Carolina. I live in rural Randolph County, but that's like being 30 or 40 years ago in North Carolina. Rural and urban are so different in North Carolina. It's like we have two different states that we're working with. But I think things are too close right now to call. We don't know who's going to be actually showing up. The Trump folk keep saying that there are voters that are showing up that aren't showing in the polls. And I will tell you, both parties are keeping their lips pretty tight because they don't know what's going to happen.
Rufus, you've been through several statewide races before. What's going to be the deciding factor in this presidential?
Turnout. And Connie is right on point there. When you have a race so close as this one in the presidential years, I don't think it's going to have much of a down-ballot drag. Now, I know all about that down-ballot drag in 1984.
Sounds like a song used to sing, the down-ballot drag.
Yeah. When Ronald Reagan took the state by 63%, it got me, it whacked Jim Hunt. I don't think you're going to see much of that now, and that's why these other races, I think, stand on their own, because this presidential race is just wacky. Who knows?
John, one of the things that I think is interesting in this is that Republican candidates recognize that Trump is toxic and don't really want to be seen with him. And yet, on the other hand, they can't distance themselves too far from him because they'll alienate the base. Is that correct?
Well, both major party candidates have the same kind of a challenge. Remember that Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump are collectively the most unpopular presidential nominees in modern history, maybe in history, period, in America. And so neither sets of candidates can afford to completely divorce themselves from their national tickets or run really close to their national tickets. They have to, as Rufus says, they have to run their own race. North Carolina is one of two states that's sort of the linchpin of this presidential story. North Carolina is the most likely Romney state right now to flip to Clinton. Iowa is the most likely Obama state to flip to Trump. So North Carolina is absolutely at the center of the story.
All right, Chris, Trump's support comes largely from white males, those without college degrees. Clinton's support comes largely from women and minorities. So looking at the demographics of the voters, the 6.7 million voters in North Carolina, how does all this shake out?
Well, I mean, I think it's close. I do think that if you average all the polls, Hillary Clinton has a 2 or 3 point lead. You mentioned there was a poll recently that showed her up 4. I don't think it's quite that big. But I do think that the college-educated folks, the people in the urban areas generally are more favorable to Clinton. Those are the people that's where the population of North Carolina is a significant part of it. Also, you know, it is true that turnout always decides the election, obviously, who shows up. And Hillary Clinton has a much larger, well-organized organization in North Carolina with offices all over the state. So when it really comes, when early voting starts, when Election Day is here, they're going to have people just like Obama and Romney did historically. They're going door to door, and Donald Trump really doesn't have of that.
Do you believe that's significant? Clinton's got like 30-some field offices in North Carolina. Trump's
I think
only
it's
got
absolutely significant. I can tell you that when I ran in '84, I had field people in every single county. Now, Donald Trump may think that this adoring crowd will win him votes. It wins those that are there if they come out. But Clinton is so far outwomaned him and outmanned him, whichever neutral thing it is. And there's no way that you can overcome that, in my opinion. She will win North Carolina.
I will go one thing into the mix. With all that's going on with the voting issue, early voting and whatever, that really does fire up the base of the Democrat Party to come out if they think something not fair is going on. So I think that will also impact the top of the ticket.
Well, I was going to ask you, John, do you think we're going to see in 28, we had this huge groundswell of young and African-American voters. Any chance we'll see anything like that in this election? It's
unlikely to be as high as in 2008 and 2012. The notion of making history was a powerful argument in 2008. It was a fairly powerful argument in 2012. Not very many young people, not very many minority voters are as passionate about making history with Hillary Clinton. She will make history, probably for good and ill.
You agree with that, Chris? I think many of the minority voters feel like they have been wronged by so many of the Republican policies in the state.
I do too, and I think Connie's onto something. The correct perception that the legislature tried to figure out which ways African American used to vote the most, and those are the ones they curtailed. I also think in 2008 they obviously wanted to elect Barack Obama. In 2012 they wanted to re-elect him. I think in 2016 they're scared of Donald Trump, and maybe rightly so. If you look at some of the polls, he's literally in some states under 1% of the African American vote because they perceive him as so anti their interests.
All right, the larger question, Rufus, in my mind, is which candidate will have most effect down the ballot? If Trump wins North Carolina, how much coattail is he going to have to carry?
He will have absolutely none, in my opinion. However, I think Hillary will have, and I've noticed that a good many Democrats are not ashamed to be with her as much as they are with Donald Trump. And the Democrats on the down ballot will be successful to a certain extent because of her organization.
Connie, I wanted to ask you, as we move into some of these races, the U.S. Senate race, why is Deborah Ross running within 4 points in the polls of an incumbent senator who's been there 12 years? I mean, has Burr just not cranked up his campaign, or what's going on?
He's running a very good campaign. In politics, a lot is timing, and this is a very hard year for Republicans. He's got a lot that's gone on within the state that's very controversial. He's got Donald Trump at the top of the ticket, and all that is impacting him. I think he's a great candidate. He has done wonderful work in Congress, particularly on early education. I mean, he's really what these urban voters, particularly the urban swing voters, would want. But he's got some drag going on with the top of the ticket and also what's been going on in the state.
Moving down a little further, John, are there any congressional races that look interesting?
Not really. The races are not competitive for the most part. They're not going to be under the current environment, current maps, current sets of candidates. But Rufus is right that the organizational effect is going to be significant, but we should not think that because Trump lacks organization that down the ballot there aren't Republicans getting the vote out. Actually, the Republican Party, of a lot of other independent groups, have lots and lots of field offices and hundreds of people paid and volunteer out getting out the vote. Both sides will get out their vote.
All right, Chris, one of the races that very seldom gets any play whatsoever, the appellate court races. Some say this Supreme Court race may be one of the more important elections we have in this state this year. Tell us why they say that.
Well, the control of the court. The conservatives or Republicans have a 4-3 majority. There's only one justice up, Bob Edmisten. He's a Republican. He's running against Mike Morgan, a Superior Court judge. It's a very, I think that'll be a close race. I think we're going to see some outside expenditures in that race as we get closer. But in a presidential year, when everything is so tight, it's going to be harder, I think, for that race to break through. I did want to make one point. There was a poll this past week, a CBS poll of likely voters that showed Deborah Ross ahead by 1 point. And it wasn't too many weeks ago we were on this program saying she's a long shot. She won't really even be that competitive.
Yes.
And she's actually either in the margin of error or ahead in several polls. So that's going to be a tight one.
All right, we're going to get back to more elections and go down the ballot. But we thank you for watching NC Spin on the air or on YouTube. Here's a reminder: there's much more on our website, ncspin.com, or NC Spin on Facebook. You'll find video footage not seen anywhere else, perspective pieces from our panel, and my weekly column. Get more balanced debate from the Old North State on ncspin.com, NCSpin on Facebook, or on Twitter at NCSpin Tweets.
NC Spin will return after these messages.
Baseball players from other countries are considered guest workers here. Baseball, the previous administration and Congress cut a deal in 2006 allowing foreign players to travel freely across the country. Not so for agriculture guest workers. They're vilified for doing work Americans won't, and they face a mountain of red tape just to get here. Shouldn't American agriculture get the same consideration as baseball? Farm Bureau and Agriculture, we keep North Carolina growing.
I help educate and inspire visually impaired students to strive for a brighter future.
I make sure visitors to the North Carolina Zoo take a walk on the wild side.
And I make sure that the fuel you buy is a quality product from pipeline to pump.
I support small businesses in North Carolina by matching them with hard-working, well-trained employees.
I make sure the roads you drive on are safe.
Scenic, the one voice speaking in support of the men and women who are making North Carolina great.
We now return to NC Spin.
We continue our analysis of the elections. It's been interesting that Governor McCrory and many Republican legislators seem to have focused on raising teacher pay to an average of $50,000 a year next year. I want to talk about this and other issues. Chris, we've seen repeated claims as to whether this $50,000 pay is factually correct. The larger question in my mind is whether it's a winning strategy for Republicans. What do you say?
Well, I think the Republicans are worried that I think they're accurately perceived, despite some commentaries recently on the other side of this. But the spending per capita, spending per student, if I can say it, is down in North Carolina since 2008. A lot of other budgets in public schools aren't what they should be, and I think people rightly blame the folks who've been in power for 4 years. This teacher pay thing is really a metaphor for all education issues, which I think is sort of silly, because there's a lot of other things that we need to be doing in education than paying teachers. And by the way, they did not put enough money in the budget to pay every teacher to an average of $50,000. It relies on local supplements, which means a lot of them aren't making that.
But Connie, McCrory seems to be doubling down on HB2 and on this $50,000 issue. These are the right issues for him to be focusing on. I mean, he's down in the polls. Should he be finding other issues to talk to the public about?
Well, he must be doubling down on the HB2 because his base still feels strongly that that was the right thing to do. So that's helping to pull out his base. And the nice thing about 50,000 is that it's an easy number to remember. You can talk about percentages or whatever, but it's something that people can remember, $50,000. So I think one helps with his base, the other helps with more of the swing votes, particularly the women in urban areas, so I think it works.
So why is Roy Cooper ahead in the polls, Rufus, if McCrory is being so effective?
Well, McCrory has never gotten above the 40% range of likability, I call it, the barometer, whether they like you or not. And that's sort of a danger area, and Roy Cooper's not enough known yet to have that many negatives. And I want to say a word about this education business. I've been around a lot of governors, and it's still that governance problem. That's our big problem in North Carolina. Three-headed monster. And I put it this way, I've never seen a governor yet that didn't say that they were the best education governor in the world. And I will say that when we stop teachers from having to use their own personal money to buy supplies, then we ought to say we're successful, and that has not happened.
All right, but John, how do you assess the campaign that Roy Cooper is waging? I mean, what's putting him ahead?
Well, partly what it is what Rufus just said. Not a lot of attention has been paid to Roy Cooper. This has been not a month or 2 or 3 months, but years of ceaseless attacks on Governor McCrory. Now, you can think the attacks were unjustified or justified, but they have been ceaseless. And so they have had an effect on him. Roy Cooper hasn't had that kind of scrutiny. I think that he will get some of that, not only media-wise, but more importantly in paid advertising, either from the McCrory campaign or others. I think the race is still competitive, but I agree that right now Cooper's probably about 4 points ahead.
Chris, the lieutenant governor's race hadn't gotten a lot of play either, and you've got Dan Forrest and Linda Coleman running against each other. The polls show it's pretty close. Will the winner be determined by who heads the ticket and wins?
I think the governor's race will have a big say in that. And remember, that was the closest race. We didn't know for a couple of days after that race in 2012 who the winner was going to be. I think it'll be that close again. I think internal polls and public polls show it's very close. I do want to get back for a second to the governor's race. You know, we've talked a lot on the show that HB2 might not be the defining issue. It might not be the defining issue, but it's a pretty big one. And if you talk to folks who are going around the state and doing polling, it is very, very unpopular.
Corey put up an ad this week saying, why are we still talking about this?
And we're still talking about it because Republican women with college degrees are furious, not just about the bathrooms, but about that local governments can't protect gay citizens from being fired for their sexual orientation, a lot of other things. It's hurt the state economically. I think that's a losing issue for Governor McCrory. I'm surprised he's still talking about it.
All right, let's talk about two other key races, the Treasurer's race and Attorney General's race. We look at Dan Blue and Dale Falwell. The polls show, Connie, they're running very close in the polling. What's going to be the deciding factor in this race?
Dale is an extremely tireless worker. And in the General Assembly, what he did over in unemployment insurance, I think the get out the vote and him working hard will make a difference. What's also surprising is I think the state employees have endorsed him also, so that's been a very unusual swing endorsement.
How about the Attorney General's race, Rufus? Josh Stein
one of the
and
hottest races in America. I noticed that the Republican opponent has a lot of PAC money coming in, and Josh Stein, though, has more money at the moment. And
so what's going to determine the outcome? Are there any issues here?
The outcome of that is going to probably be the law enforcement community. When they get riled up, they can help make or break an attorney general.
John, any other Council of State races that look interesting?
Well, keep an eye on the Commissioner of Labor, simply because Cherie Berry has been subject to significant media hits in the last year, and her opponent is the former mayor of Raleigh, Charles Meeker. So I don't know that that's the top tier race on the Council of State, but it's another one to be watching.
Chris, very few people think the Republicans are going to lose control of the legislature, but there is some speculation that they might lose veto-proof majorities in either the House or Senate. Do you think that's true? And if so, what impact would it have?
Well, it has a significant impact, especially if Roy Cooper is elected as the next governor, because it will give him more power, and the legislature won't be able to do whatever they want. The governor will have the veto power. Although it's worth noting, the legislature overrode Governor McCrory many times in his first term. I do think there's a significant chance the Democrats could win enough seats to get to end the supermajority in the House. Seems a little tougher in the Senate, but I think especially in the urban areas, the Raleigh-Durham area, the Charlotte area, Republicans right now in legislative races are behind in a significant number of races. Again, we're only in September, and a lot of things can happen when money starts being spent, but right now I think the Democrats have a good chance of breaking the supermajority.
One point I want to make as we conclude this segment, one of you raised the subject about margin of error so far as these polls are concerned, and I think that is something that as our viewers and listeners read these polls and see the polls resort, for instance, a 4% margin of error means you could either add 4 points or subtract 4 points from any candidate, and it could vastly affect the outcome. So as you're looking at poll results, be sure to see what the margin of error is. When we come back after these messages, we're going to talk about the judicial redistricting.
NC Spin will return after these messages.
Helping people. It's all in a day's work for Wayne Goodwin. As Commissioner of Insurance, Wayne Goodwin's been a tireless advocate for North Carolina families, helping more than 100,000 seniors enroll in the Medicare drug plan while protecting them from insurance scams. And Wayne Goodwin has been fighting big insurance companies' proposals to raise rates for car, home, and health insurance. Wayne Goodwin, more than a public servant, a true friend for consumers.
Healthy individuals improve the economic health of communities. Growing Better Together explores this intersection of rural health and economic development. Join the conversation and meet candidates for governor and U.S. Senate September 26-27 at the 2016 North Carolina Rural Assembly. Register now at ncruralcenter.org.
You sleep on concrete till your body get immune to concrete.
My mom got my brother and I up and said, come on, we're leaving.
I became homeless in the beginning of this year.
When I was about 4 or 5 years old, our house caught fire.
I used to see my brother. If he see me, he'd turn and go the other direction.
We did the only thing that we could think of, and we went to a Salvation Army shelter.
You know, we don't have this, like, what's your background look like? We just say, what do you need?
I remember the man from the Salvation Army coming down with a box of clothes.
The Salvation Army officer bought my brother and I an ice cream cone.
Last week, my brother walked up to me, and he just started a conversation.
Today I've given my life to the Salvation Army because I remember what somebody did for me, my brother, and my mom over 30 years ago.
The Salvation Army for me means hope.
Compassion.
Family.
Support.
We now return to NC Spin.
The courts have recently issued 2 rulings on the constitutionality of North Carolina's 2013 redistricting. And in both instances, federal courts have said congressional and legislative maps were racially discriminatory and declared them unconstitutional, resulting in renewed demands for an independent redistricting commission. 10 former state judges, 5 Republicans and 5 Democrats, recently released maps showing that congressional districts could be drawn that didn't favor one party or another, or where incumbent congressmen live. These maps have met with strong support and strong criticism. Rufus, you've no doubt had the chance to examine the product of these judges. What's your reaction to them? Do they pass the test for competitive district?
We should have had this years and years ago in some of the most conservative states in the union have these, and they're not going to harm anybody unless you're afraid of losing under a independent redistricting scheme. And I think it's very educational that these individuals were even Steven, Republican, Democrat, and they were doing no gimmicks, and we don't like it because we think our folks might not win.
I want to go around the table. Okay, the way these maps are drawn, 6 of the districts were firmly Republicans, 4 favored Democrats, 3 would be toss-ups. Currently, Republicans control 10 congressional districts. Now, the critics of the map say this project was supported by liberal groups who only wanted to elect Democrats. Supporters say that it would create more competitive elections, keep counties intact, and population counts consistently. I want to know who's right and wrong. John, I'll start with you.
Well, both of those statements are correct. I mean, the project was supported by a fair number of liberals. I like the project too, but it was supported by liberals. On the other hand, it creates more competitive districts. Those are not the right objections. The real objection to this, there's a minor quibble that had to do with the original version, did not actually necessarily meet the one person, one vote standard. You can fix that. It wasn't a big deal. The more significant problem here, Tom, and I've said this for months and years, they said, well, we complied with the Voting Rights Act. Did they? Who knows? There is no standard that is currently operable of Voting Rights Act. That's the problem with the maps. I don't mind the outcome, but the process is still hampered by a lack of clarity about the Voting Rights Act and what it requires.
Who's right and who's wrong, Rufus?
Well, nothing can be as bad as it is right now. We've been in court for years and years and years. Since I was in office, we've been in court every single year, sometimes a week up before the election. So nothing could be as bad as we have it. So I think we're on the right track, but let's see if it ever gets done.
Who's right and who's wrong, Connie?
Well, I think it's ironic, and it always happens like this. The party that's not in power wants the independent redistricting, and then as soon as they take over, they don't want it anymore. So beauty's in the eye of the beholder.
Who's right and who's wrong?
Well, shouldn't we want voters to decide elections and not politicians? And I think the beauty of this is that remember, this is 5 Democrats and 5 Republicans, regardless who sponsored it. We have Republican conservative judges, including former Chief Justice I. Beverly Lake Jr., who sat there and didn't look at political affiliation, didn't look at where people lived, came up with a map that they believe satisfies the Voting Rights Act, and we have a very competitive state, which all people should want, instead so
Final
the politicians
question.
don't win.
The courts have told the 2017 session of the legislature to redraw these congressional maps because they didn't have time to do so before the election. Any chance we're going to see any of
legislative maps?
What they have to do are the legislative maps. The legislative maps will be redrawn. They will look a little bit like the congressional maps. Honestly, the congressional map that the legislature drew is not radically different from the one the judges drew. It's different in the partisan layout, but not so much in the map itself.
All right, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to ask the panel to tell us something we don't know.
NC Spin is brought to you in part by the North Carolina Farm Bureau. The Farm Bureau and Agriculture. We keep North Carolina growing.
The cost of everything has gone up dramatically over the last 75 years. With one exception, keeping electricity affordable. That's the power of your co-op membership. Learn more at togetherwesave.com.
North Carolina's Touchstone Energy Cooperatives, looking out for you.
It's a fact, patients who receive care in the medical home from a trusted family physician reduce healthcare costs through prevention, early detection, and affordable management of high-cost chronic diseases.
Every dollar invested in healthcare matters. Let's invest them wisely, building on North Carolina's medical home model. Better health begins with a medical home, a trusted family physician, the best return on our healthcare investment. Learn about the importance of medical homes at OurNCHealthcare.com.
I help educate and inspire visually impaired students to strive for a brighter future.
I make sure visitors to the North Carolina Zoo take a walk on the wild side.
And I make sure that the fuel you buy is a quality product from pipeline to pump.
I support small businesses in North Carolina by matching them with hard-working, well-trained employees.
I make sure the roads you drive on are safe.
Scenic, the one voice speaking in support of the men and women who are making North Carolina great.
We now return to NC Spin.
Okay, here's the best part of the show to many people. It's when we ask the panel to tell us something we don't know. Chris Fitzsimon, I'll start with you.
I was really interested this past week. A prominent governor in the United States was talking about how important it was that his state had expanded Medicaid and provided health care for 500,000 low-income people in the state. His name was Chris Christie in Virginia, and he was telling his critics that they were wrong. Meanwhile, the Georgia Chamber of Commerce just endorsed a plan to expand Medicaid. This will be a huge issue in 2017 in North Carolina.
Interesting. Tell us something we don't know, Connie Wilson.
Well, this is something that folk that were involved in politics in '94 may remember, but they might have forgotten. And in '94, on Election Day in the House, we went from 42 Republicans to 68 in one day. So just a few percentage points can make a big difference, and that's why get out the vote is so critical, and that's why people are worried right now, because this could be another 94.
Could be a game changer.
You never know.
Tell us something we don't know, Rufus.
Well, while this is not the Oprah Winfrey Book Club of the Week, of the month, I want to recommend Hillbilly Elegy by J.D. Vance, and it can tell you a lot about these folks that are Trumpettes and others, because this young man grew up among families that were from the hollows of Kentucky and West Virginia, and he says why everybody is so mad.
A good friend of mine, A.G. Billard, recommended that book to me. John, 30 seconds.
In North Dakota, there's been a warrant issued for the arrest of Green Party presidential nominee Jill Stein. She was involved in a protest of an oil industry event. So she's under warrant in North Dakota. That means that officially Gary Johnson, who's one took over the line, is the least bizarre candidate in the presidential race, officially.
Well, you've heard our spin on the issues of the day. To stay informed all during the week, give your feedback, and read my weekly column, be sure to visit our website, ncspin.com, or catch NC Spin on Facebook. And join us next week when we'll have more balanced debate for the Old North State. Until then, stay informed and watch out for the spin.
Join us next week and get the spin on issues facing our state.